Hey everybody, Spacewizard here. In most of my videos I usually talk about the strongest cards in Hearthstone because those are obviously the most relevant, but there are a lot of interesting and some not so interesting cards that don't get played at all in Hearthstone, and since it just so happens that the Hearthhead card database allows you to sort by card popularity, this week we're going to be taking a look at the top 10 least used cards on Hearthhead. Now, it should be mentioned that since Whispers of the Old Gods hasn't been out for nearly as long as the rest of the expansions, the majority of these cards are going to be from Whispers of the Old Gods, since cards that have been out longer have been used more overall. I'll throw in some honorable mentions from older expansions at the end of this video. Number 10 is Darkshire Librarian, a 3-2 for 2 with a battlecry that discards a random card and a death rattle that draws a card. I was actually really surprised to see this card on the list because it's without a doubt the best card out of all 10. It just doesn't really have a place in the current metagame. Obviously, for this card to be playable, there would have to be more cards in the game with discard synergy, and right now the only cards that synergize with discarding are Fist of Jaraxxus and Tiny Knight of Evil, which is also a 2-drop. Number 9 is Blood of the Ancient One, a 9/9 for 9 with if you control 2 of these at the end of your turn, merge them into the Ancient One, which is a 30/30. I don't think anyone will be surprised to see this on the list. While this effect is certainly fun, it's also borderline impossible to pull off. So much so that I don't think I've ever once seen it performed in-game. And even if you do manage to get the 30/30 on the board, it's not like it's invulnerable to removal, so it most likely won't even be able to attack. Cool card, it's just obviously not meant for competitive play, and so you have to expect that it won't be played very often. Number 8 is Tentacles for Arms, a 2-2 weapon for 5 with a death rattle that returns it to your hand. This card's shtick is that it's technically infinite value, but because you'll never have enough time to actually play it enough to make it worthwhile, and because there are far better options for high-value cards like Elise Starseeker, Tentacle for Arms is just kind of a useless card. Number 7 is Sea Reaver, a 6/7 for 6 that deals 1 damage to your minions when you draw it. This guy, at the time of his release, was obviously meant to be an addition to Patron Warrior decks that used Whirlwind effects to activate their Grim Patrons and other miscellaneous abilities. Unfortunately, the Sea Reaver's effect proved to just be too random to be consistently good, and since there were no other decks that it fit into, nobody had any reason to play it, and frankly, I don't think there will ever be a reason to play it because of how random its effect is. Number 6 is Validated Doomsayer, a 0/7 for 4 with at the start of your turn set this minion's attack to 7. To be perfectly blunt, this card is just too slow. A 4-mana 7/7 may seem very appealing because of cards like Flame Wreath Faceless, but if the card doesn't actually become a 7/7 until your next turn, then it's vulnerable to trades. If your opponent has any minions on the board, they can easily trade them into the Validated Doomsayer without taking any damage, which effectively makes your play entirely useless unless your opponent is incapable of trading on their next turn. Number 5 is Magnetar Alpha, a 5/3 for 4 that also damages the minions next to whomever he attacks. Simply put, this card's health is just too low for it to be good. If you could actually attack with it, then there might be some merit to it, but 100% of the time, this guy is either going to get traded into very efficiently for your opponent, or destroyed by a cheap removal spell. You just can't afford to play a card with such a subpar stat line. Number 4 is Darkspeaker, a 3/6 for 5 with a battlecry that swaps its stats with a friendly minion. This is a very interesting card in my opinion, but as it turns out, essentially transforming a friendly minion into a 3/6 for 5 isn't very strong. In the best case scenario, you can give a 1/1+2/5, which just isn't going to be worth the mana you're playing the effect for. The only way this card could ever see play is if Blizzard printed 1 or 2 low mana cost minions with very powerful effects like Bran Bronzebeard that could really stand to benefit from the increased stats, but even then I doubt Darkspeaker would see play over more efficient buffs. Number 3 is Duskboar, a 4/1 for 2, and there's really not much to say about this card. It's a 2-drop with 1 health and no ability, so it's just too vulnerable to hero powers for it to see any play. Number 2 is Amgam Rager, a 1/5 for 3, and again there's no real insight I can give here. This card's stat line is just too weak for it to see any play, although unlike Duskboar, Amgam Rager was clearly just printed as a joke because of how unplayable Magma Rager is. And lastly, the number 1 least used card on Hearthhead is the Whoopee Monster, a legendary 6/7 for 8 with whenever this attacks and kills a minion, gain +2/+2. Not surprisingly, the worst legendary in the game is also the least used card in the game. For 8 mana, you're getting a Boulderfist Ogre's worth of stats, and an effect that is very clearly not even remotely worth the additional 2 mana that you're paying for it. I suspect that this card is as bad as it is solely so that Forbidden Shaping would have a bad outcome at 8 mana. And now I'm going to very quickly list an honorable mention from each of the older sets that didn't make it into this list. From the basic set, Magma Rager. From the classic set, Kidnapper. From the Curse of Naxxramas set, Anubar Ambusher. From Goblins vs. Gnomes, Recycle. From the Blackrock Mountain set, Core Rager. And from the League of Explorers set, Jungle Moonkin. That's it for this week's video, guys, but don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. I'll be back next week with another new video, but until then, you can check out Hearthhead.com or either of its social media pages for all sorts of Hearthstone-related content. See you next time, everybody.